My name's Clive Bright. I'm an organic farm in South Sligo in proper heavy land. We grow rushes, and I started mob grazing about 6 years ago after watching this dude on YouTube, and talking about learning a lot from the US, and sometimes their stuff doesn't translate over here. Greg Judy is mob grazing year round in Missouri, and the reason I like him is he follows a kind of a system which is it's holistic management basically, but it's a set of monitoring tools. So it actually works everywhere. It works in Sligo, it works in brilliant land, it works in poor land. Because it's not a set regime. It's not a fixed thing. So you're just monitoring things along the way, and you're building your own kind of system using those monitoring tools. So mob grazing for me is different from mob grazing down Tipperary. The stocking rates are going to be different. All that kind of stuff is going to be different. But the advantage of it is that it allows you to farm within your own ecosystem and your own kind of your own environment, and what your environment can give without pushing it too much, and you're kind of you're just letting the land tell you what it can do, and you're regenerating it in the process. So you're getting it better and better all the time. So basically, if you look at an ecosystem in its very basic level, if it's functioning well, it'll function pretty much on its own. And if you look at a farm as an ecosystem, you're just slotting in grazing herbivores into that ecosystem and observing their role in that system and trying to manage that. So one of the main things with farming is that livestock are they're a prey animal without a predator, and the farmer needs to be the predator. So, for instance, in the wild, predator takes out all the weak animals, takes out all that kind of thing. So, kind of propping up weak animals with drugs and all that kind of stuff is probably a bad idea, and you're probably better to cull them out of your system. And function as the predator within your system. The basis of mob grazing is this kind of the way natural grassland ecosystems were made throughout the world, and it's basically large herbivores trampling grass, eating a little bit, moving along, and long recovery periods. So the reason it functions as an ecosystem is it does a lot more, but the three basic kind of legs of it are that you're supporting the animals, they're trampling the grass, and that's feeding the soil, and through millennia, that kind of symbiosis with grass has developed alongside herbivores, and it once it's recovered, it just keeps on growing and functioning within that system. So that's kind of what it looks like in Sligo. So soil biology got me on a microscope and got really into Elaine Ingham and did loads of rooting around, and it was a great exercise, and I still root around quite a bit in the soil, but just to kind of make yourself aware that's what you're kind of feeding all the time, and getting the soil down. And basically what the soil needs is living roots and organic matter and plant litter. So it's just an example there of kind of grasswort before a graze, and then afterwards. So there's loads of residual matter, loads of trampled grass, and dung on top of it. Has loads of advantages in that it doesn't dry out so easily. Sequesters carbon, thanks. But the principal thing is you're feeding your fungi and your bacteria. And Gary was talking about it yesterday, and they kind of green vegetative grass before it goes to Seed kind of feeds bacteria a little bit more, and kind of stalky stuff with lots of lignin in it will feed fungi a lot more. So it's good to get that mix. Good sometimes to graze long grass, but if you're looking for animal thrive, you're going to be trying to focus on well-recovered vegetative grass. Sorry, I'm rushing because I have loads of stuff to get through. So that's what it looks like kind of afterwards. That's a little bit of regrowth, and you can see the organic matter. It disappears really quickly, but that was probably about 2 inches, and you can just about see the soil coming through underneath it. So this soil biology consumes it quite quickly. We winter our cattle presently, so we compost all our farmyard manure. We use a good bit of wood chip. No problem composting that. It takes a lot of energy, but lots of driving the tractor back and forth. This was an interesting one. It was a pile of wood chip farmyard manure, and it would have been very fungal rich because there was a lot of. It had been turned 8 or 9 times, and it had actually gone ambient. That it stopped heating, and I wanted to cover it up, and I had no compost cover at the time, and I just covered it in old hay, and within about 3 weeks the compost pile ate the hay. It's just all gone. It just disappeared. So I just spread it right there. So the main thing, and I've made a disaster of my mob grazing this year. I had to abandon it because I was overstocked last winter, and being the rubbishy year it was and everything, and I turned out too early, and I grazed grass that wasn't recovered. And the one thing, if you're going to take anything away today about mob grazing, is that your grass must be recovered before you graze it. And what recovered means is that it's at basically the 4-leaf stage, 3 to 4 leaf stage. And when you graze grass, it has reserves in its roots, and it starts using them to push up the new leaves to get more photosynthesis going on, and then that starts putting down more reserves into the roots and growing the grass. But when the grass is recovered to the 4-leaf stage, it has filled its reserves again, and it's just processing that the sunlight into more growth. So that's the stage where it's fully recovered, and if you graze it again, it's got loads of vigor to grow again. Just a little detail there at the bottom. I think that's from Christine Jones. That's where I heard it anyway. That if you graze more than 50% of the plant, that the roots remain completely functional and intact. And if you graze more than 70%, about half of them just kind of shut down and stop growing while it's recovering for about 3 weeks. And then if you graze like right down to the base, so kind of golf ball grazing, the roots take about 3 weeks to kick back into action and then grow. So if you're not fertilizing, you'll get that lag. So you're kind of shooting yourself in the foot by grazing too much and slowing down your recovery period. Mob grazing basically won't work. If you're trying to mob graze and you graze unrecovered grass, it's just not going to work. You're going to fail. And so the grass recovery period on your farm dictates your herd size. So that's what I was saying. I was overstocked, and I messed up my whole plan for the year. And being overstocked just costs you money, because you either have to buy in feed, or you just have to buy in feed, or you'll starve your animals, and then you'll end up selling them at a time when it's not suitable. So the thing to do probably is to. I met Greg Judy in the summer, as you can see from the picture at the start, and he said he always has the bottom 10% of his herd earmarked for a quick cull. So if he preempts the worst case scenario, has he enough grass to get round and survive full rotation or 2 rotations, or with the stock he has? Does he need to up that stock? Does he need to down that stock? But he always has the bottom 10% earmarked. And if he thinks, like last autumn, I knew going into the shed, unless there was a good spring, I was snookered, and I risked it. And I shouldn't have. So before prices were crap last autumn, but they were worse than spring, so I should have offloaded them last autumn, and I would have been fine. It wouldn't have cost me any money. Yeah, during the grazing season, then just a couple of tips on when you're grazing. You should back fence. If you're grazing along through paddocks, you should back fence so that cattle can't get back for every 3 days, basically. So if your cows shouldn't be on a paddock or have access to previous paddocks for about 3 days, for more than 3 days, because the grass starts recovering at that point, and if they have access to that, they'll go back and graze it, and then you're overgrazing grass that hasn't recovered. So it's just to watch out for that. Yeah, this is quite cool actually. It was another tip from Greg Judy. During summer grazing, it's your optimum time for putting growth on animals, and you're trying to get as much thrive and weight gain on animals as you can. And a big kind of criticism sometimes of mob grazing is your grazing covers that are too heavy and too seed heady and everything else. And as with any grazing, there is an optimum point to graze grass, and that's at the 4-leaf stage before it goes to seed. If the grass isn't stressed, it can hang around there for quite a while, depending on the species and when its natural seeding time is. But yeah, so what Greg does is when he's moving around, and he grass finishes beef as well, so he's moving his stock around, and if his grass starts to get ahead of him, traditionally what people do is bale that out and keep going, and they keep the bales for the winter, or they feed the bales when they need them. But what he does, he just leaves it there, just skips it, goes on to the grass that's still vegetative, and keeps going, and he leaves that there as a reserve. And if I had done that this year, it would have been sound, because when the drought hit, I would have had a big bank of grass, and you can slow right down through that heavy cover if you need to, or you can leave it there till the autumn, till the grass starts to slow down. And it's equally as good as feeding silage in the shed, if not better. So why bother harvesting it and spend an €8 bale bringing it in when you can just leave it there and graze it when you need it? And when you do it that way as well, when you mow that field, you're taking it down to really short grass, so you have a really slow recovery again after that. Whereas if you do it this way, it's standing there, and when you actually do graze it, you're trampling as well, so you're getting more organic matter into the soil. Another cool trick, he was full of tips. He's great. If you're interested in mob grazing, YouTube Greg Judy, and you'll be up all night. He's great. So another cool one was in a weedy area in a field. Typically, what I would have done in the spring was go out and I'd go, oh, that little corner there is all docks, and I'd pound the herd into it and try and wipe them out and trample them and everything else, and completely pointless, because basically what you do is he reckons that the weakest or most vulnerable time for that plant is in the spring, when it's coming up with the grass, so they're all competing evenly, and you run the herd in there, and they eat all the grass out, and you give them loads of life so that the weed goes mental then, because it's no competition. So he was saying just skip that weedy area in the first rotation, let the grass compete with it, and then go in really hard and trample the whole lot together, and you'll kind of have an even base the whole way up. The weed will be weaker, and then when you go in and trample it, then you're more likely to have an effect on it. Positive effect. 9, 5. I'm going to skip that because there's another man going to talk all about that. Gut fill. Yeah, so this is the big monitor for your cattle. So another thing Greg was saying, that when you start mob grazing, if you start mob grazing, is look after your animals first. Although you are looking after the soil and the grass and everything else, you have to save yourself and your own financial situation before you can save the world. So animal performance markers are most important one, that every day when you move your cows, or whenever you move your cows, every 3 days or twice a day, this little triangle in front of the hip is full. So that's where the rumen is. There's a little triangular indent there. Well, it shouldn't be an indent, it should be flat or bulging if it's full. But if they're empty, that's hollow. And, you never learn that in agricultural college. But so if that's full all the time, their gut is always full and they're always metabolizing food and they're always gaining. If that's empty, then you're limiting your cow's growth or your animal's growth. Another key thing, rather than, a lot of people are talking about amending the soil and fixing the soil and everything else, I'm kind of working at it from a different angle and just letting the animals do the work for me, and the plants do the work for me. And it's a slow process. It's not a quick fix. But there was a lady asked earlier about a copper deficiency. I have a copper deficiency in my soil, and I have a few sheep as well, and two of the ewes had lambs, and they started dying, and I got them tested, and it was a copper. What's that called? Copper. There's a disease name for it, but yeah. My response to that was to cull the ewes, because the other lambs were fine, and they were breeding animals that were adapted to the land, and they were able to do fine on it. So basically, I cull quite hard. Anything that doesn't suit the system goes, and then I end up with animals that thrive on my land. So one of the main markers for that is that they shed down. So if they're not shedding down to their sleek summer coat, there's a deficiency in some mineral in the animal, and so they're not getting it from the soil. Therefore, I don't want to have them. They may have parasites as well, but clean tail should be a good start to not having parasites, or a key marker for not having parasites, and there's general thrive. And then when you move them into a paddock or out of a paddock, or you think you have your work done for the day, if they're not happy there and if they're bawling, there's something up. So your paddock's either too small, or they haven't enough grass, or they need something else. So just watch their behaviour. Their cow dung, all year round, you're trying to manage to keep cow dungs like that, or even slightly more solid than that. You definitely don't want skittery stuff, because you're just wasting grass through them. So that they need more fibre and more. Generally, it won't happen with cover grass as long as they're just grazing the top third. Sorry, that last one. I think that's a dung beetle larvae there. And just wormholes. That's after a cow pat. It's not that one, but it's after a cow pat is broken down for a couple of weeks and just scraped off the cow pat, and that's what was underneath. So lots of biological activity. So why bother mob graze? Grazing animals will only enhance an ecosystem if they're managed correctly. So you can have animals doing loads of damage, and there's loads of people giving out about cows and all that kind of stuff, but if they're managed correctly, they can be hugely beneficial to the ecosystem. Yeah, so this is the bit I like. If it's just a monitoring system that makes sure you don't outperform your environment. So, and as your environment gets better, you can up your stocking rate. But there's no point. You're wasting your time overstocking. It's just going to cost you money. And nobody pays you to overproduce anyway, so why would you bother? Yeah, so the key thing is that you can cut all your costs, regenerate your soil, rebuild and rejuvenate the natural nutrient cycling. You grow grass, you're free. Why wouldn't you mob graze? They're basically tools of the trade. Everyone has them, pretty much. Not far off it anyway. It's not going to break the bank buying a few pigtails. And I run all overground pipes and just a mobile water trough, drag it around to all the paddocks. It takes me about 20 minutes a day to do the farming. It's definitely worth designing and investing in infrastructure. That being just designing a permanent fence line that carries all your electricity. You can run your temporary fences from really efficiently. Like, so maybe every field has 2 sides with live electric wire that you can just make a grid anyway with a temporary electric fence. And the more of that clever stuff you have in place, the quicker your farming is and more efficient your farming is going to be. The kind of one criticism is that if you're isolating animals in a paddock, they have no hedgerow or no browse, or you're limiting their range of diet. You're keeping them there for a day or half a day or 3 days at most. So they are getting a diverse diet, but I'd definitely be a huge advocate for planting as much hedges as you can and much diverse browse as you can. This year we're planting new woodland, and we're going to sheep fence the whole lot, and we're going to plant inside the sheep fence with willow the whole way around, just stick in willow canes the whole way around, just so they'll graze, and we'll mix it up with some other stuff, ash, and read some interesting research on bamboo as well as a browsing crop. Yeah, and then you have this little niche down underneath all those hedges where you can stick in, if you have access to cheap ones, kind of perennial herbs like tansy and feverfew and valerian and comfrey, and they're just other little diverse things for the plants to get. I have loads to do yet. And silvopasture is an amazing untapped thing that we don't do here. This is in Lochgall up in Antrim, and Ollie Moore wrote a little bit about it during the summer, and they had fantastic results during the drought. They had no dip in production or anything. Just leaves you really resilient. I'm only starting now. Okay. So I'll go through this really quickly. So basically what you're trying to do is graze the top third of the grass, fill the animals, trample some grass to feed the soil, and leave enough grass that you have loads of photosynthesis still going on. So a good way to kind of judge that quickly when you go in, your paddock should be quite well trampled, but you should have enough grass for another day in the paddock when you leave it, and that's your recovery grass. You get really quick recovery from that. If you have spot grazing and the cattle have time to go around and choose the little sweeter bits that they want, and you have all these tufts of rough grass, your paddock is too big. And your animals, as I said before, should be full when they're leaving the paddock. So if they're not full, the paddock's too small. Another indicator that's too small, when these were on this side, they grazed in under the fence. So the day before that move, they hadn't enough grass. So, so you have to watch for all those things and adjust all the time, because the paddock size changes throughout the season and throughout the grass growth and the moisture level, and it's constantly changing. So you just have to monitor all these things, and you get really kind of good at it. You can get cocky as well and mess up. But the worst thing that can happen is they'll be either too hungry or you won't get a good trample on one day, and then you just adjust it the next day. Okay. A minute on each one of these. Grazing throughout the season. I've tried to break it up just for myself, but when you're grazing, when you turn out in spring, if you're housing, you're aiming to turn out into cover you left behind the last autumn before you housed, and have fresh recovered grass growing up through that. So when the cows go out on that, they have the leafy green grass that they always get in spring that they shoot out. You can't stand behind them. But if it's growing up through cover that was left there from the autumn, they're going to get a bite of that as well, and it'll totally balance their diet, and they'll be thriving from day one when you turn them out. So the downside of kind of my system at the moment is the turnout is quite late, because you have to keep your cattle in until the grass is at the 4-leaf stage. So sometimes that's the middle of May. Which is the balls, but when you get out, then you're flying. You're invincible for the summer, and well into winter. I often don't house till after Christmas either, so it's still quite a short winter. Yeah, early overgrazing is a disaster. Greg Judy reckons you'll damage your sward so much that you'll lose about 40% production in the year, and I can testify to that. So I still have quite a lot of weeds, and I do a top-in rotation. So this is quite an intensive time, a busy time in the year. So I move them twice a day during that to get smaller paddocks twice a day. Then they do a huge trampling on the grass, a lot of trampling. If you do rectangular paddocks, they'll trample more and utilise less of the grass. If you do square paddocks, they'll eat more and trample less. So you have that kind of layout tool to alter what your goal is. So I'm aiming to get a big trample, so get all the grass down and the weeds are still standing. I can go across and just top the thistles at that stage. That's kind of before they're going in and after. So like the topper has 4-inch skids on it, so it's not going to damage any of that grass really. Then after that, the full focus then is building a wedge as much as you can. So you're literally just grazing the tops of the plants all the time, trampling a third and leaving what you would consider enough grass for another day really, which is generally about another third. Yeah, if you move twice daily, you'll get a lot better results. If you move once daily, it'll be fine. If you move 3 days, it's less good, but it's still better than anything else. And then you're just aiming to do that thing where you're feeding the cattle, feeding the soil, and getting plenty of photosynthesis going on. Then you're going to have this huge cover coming into winter, like it'll be well up here. And you can slow your grazing right down because the plants go dormant-ish. So they've put down all their root reserves into the roots to recover next spring. So you can kind of do what you want with the grass, what's above ground, keeping in mind that you want to keep a litter on the ground. So you can slow grazing really down quite quickly and creep through the grass and just keep the cattle out and fed for as long as possible. You can prolong the grazing season by putting hay out there as well, but the key to that is not to run out of grass and then start feeding hay. You feed your hay when you have grass, so you slow down your rotation so that they're getting the grass as well as the hay, and they're getting plenty of trampled organic matter so that you're not eating out your grass. They're nibbling on hay and going around and eating the grass again. You're trying to keep as much cover as you can. Mob grazing all year round, certainly possible. Greg Judy does it, and I have a friend who took my advice and he does it as well. I have yet to do it. Don't really have the balls yet, but I'm working on it. Yeah, 80% of your costs are in the winter. So if you cut your livestock down by half and chance grazing all year round, sure it's worth the go, isn't it? The major thing is that you have plenty of shelter for your cattle in the winter. This is my friend who I advise. He's a 25-acre farm. It's really heavy clay and really heavy peaty around the bottom, so it's typical kind of Sligo landscape. It's old kind of planted land. There's a big house, a small big house on it. So there's loads of trees, loads of lovely beech trees, loads of old hedges and stuff. Plenty of cover and plenty of shelter. And topographically, that's a big hill there, and all the westward wind goes that way. So you're sheltered on the east side, and vice versa if the wind is coming the other way. So he actually works across it, watches the weather, and if it's going to be really bad easterly wind, he moves them over the other side. But in the winter time, he has maybe 7 or 8 animals, and he's piling them into. He's moving them from that side to that side. So they're leaving loads of stuff behind, and they're thriving quite well. And he makes no silage at all. He just grazes them all year, and that's kind of a good trample and loads of manure after they leave a plot. It's before and after. And what he does then in the spring, he leaves enough of that stuff. He's enough of that stuff planned that it'll last him through till middle of May. So he's doing the same thing. He's growing when he's coming into May. He's still grazing that stuff with new stuff growing up through it. So by the time he gets into his summer grazing rotation, he's on nice fresh grass. So the exclusion zone, this is kind of an advanced tool that Greg Judy does. Every so often there'll be an area in the field that he wants to increase diversity, and he'll park the animals in there like at that mental density, like they would be in a shed or even denser. They're just in there standing for an hour or so. You just electric fence them in there and go and have your dinner and come back again. And you do that on very heavy grass, and they trample everything. And the high density grazing changes, it kind of invigorates the soil. You're not going to do this in heavy weather or anything. You'll pick a good time to do it. And what it often does is promotes clovers and stuff, and you can see that in your own farms around gateways and stuff where there would have been a high impact. Another one is just broadcasting seed and running the cattle through at a sort of density like that over a small. You could do an acre and move them 8 times in that day, and you have the whole field reseeded. That's it. Thank you.